In the darkest shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes. The order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
All right. Well, let's see where we at. I've got a pen and I've got a phone. Obama threatens to bypass embattled Congress. Daily Mail, January 14th, 2014. Obama's determination to use the power of executive orders and administrative actions, as well as his decision to convene key figures from private enterprises, education, more likely, and other interest groups to help advance his agenda underscores some of the built-in powers of presidency. Clinton-era White House Chief of Staff John Podesta from Pizzagate, who is joining the White House as a senior advisor, has long pressed Obama to use his executive authority to get around congressional opposition. Podesta co-authored a report in 2010 for the Liberal Center for American Progress, commies, that was essentially a treatise on the presidential authority. It argued that both President George W. Bush and Slick Willie Bill Clinton had enacted aspects of their agendas even in the face of a divided Congress. The upshot, congressional gridlock does not mean the federal government stands still, Podesta wrote. The administration has similar opportunity to use available executive authorities while also working with Congress where possible. Here we go.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
All right, welcome to the Abercast. I'm your host, homeboy. I'm your host boy, John Towers. I'm not your soy boy though, John Towers. Thank you for tuning in this week. Before we get rolling, I'd like to say the Stigmata Studios website is newly redesigned. Please check it out at stigmatastudios.com. The Abercast has its own section. You can just go to abercast.com to find that. Please, I'd like to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes. And I have a Patreon account. Would like everyone to check out. The main goal of it right now is I want to launch a Books for Soldiers program for the men and women that are serving overseas. The idea is they are bored. There's no real bookstore to get to or whatever. So I have accounts with two. It's charity Books for Soldiers type of programs, and I just need help. I figure we could put a call out for books, and I need help paying for the P.O. boxes and the shipping and handling and that kind of stuff. So not really a whole lot of action at the Patreon thing yet, but there is a lot of fun stuff, rewards and whatnot cooking out there, and there's tons of exclusive audio on there, things that did not make the moving day cut, stuff that's just been buried for a long time, and just other funny stuff that's up there. So please consider checking out the Patreon. It's all very modest stuff, and one of the first for a certain tier, one of the first things we're going to do is I'm going to get the oath printed on a bunch of mason jars, so you guys can all have your own mason jars to mix up your gin jihads in. So that's that. There we go. I almost got in a fight at a diner the other day. It says diner is super convenient for me to get to, even though the food is not so good and it's overpriced most of the time. But I went there and I've been getting salads for lunch. I was going to get a salad, and they had a Reuben on special. And I'm like, I'm like kind of a Reuben snob. So I was like, well, I'll try this Reuben, whatever. I'm pretty sure it's going to be dog shit, but even a dog shit Reuben, I guess, is better than a salad. That was the math that I did to get there. So I get there, and my problem with this place is they never have two things that match. Like, so this is a perfect example. So I go like, hey, I want the Reuben special, and he's like, well, what do you want for your side dishes? And I look, and he had like lentil bean soup and like rice pilaf. And I was like, I don't want a side. And he was like, well, you're paying for it, you might as well get a side. And I'm like, well, look, like, I don't want rice pilaf. I'm like, you don't ever have anything that matches. Like, you don't eat rice pilaf with a Reuben. And I was like, you don't eat bean soup with a Reuben. I was like, what, you gotta have French fries or fucking tater tots and a dill pickle. That's how you fucking serve a Reuben. You don't serve a Reuben with a fucking lentil soup. And he was like, well, you could eat healthy and get the fruit salad. And he had like chopped up fruit salad in another part of the thing. And I'm like, bro, people don't eat Reubens because they're health conscious. Like, I'll just fucking skip all this side dish shit. Like, you go there and he's like, okay, well, we got Sloppy Joes. I'm also a big Sloppy Joe fan. When I was in the Army, I probably ate a Sloppy Joe every day of the 4 years that I was in the Army, unless I was deployed. Every day on base, in garrison, however you want to put it. Sloppy Joe was Sloppy Joe Day, baby. Anyhow, so I'll have the same thing where I'm like, okay, well, Sloppy Joe, can't go wrong. And he's like, well, what sides do you want? We have Brussels sprouts and mixed vegetables. Neither of those things go with Sloppy Joe's, fucking bro. Anyhow, I had it. I had it and I snapped. The guy looked so sad. The poor diner guy the proprietor, I guess, of this place. He looks so sad, but I don't know. What do you think? Would you eat fruit salad with a fucking Reuben? No. Would you? I don't know. I'm asking you. Would you eat lentil fucking bean soup with a Reuben? I don't know, fucking Jews that run delis in New York are rolling over in their graves looking at this guy's fucking menu with these Reubens. Anyhow, the whole point of that story was just to go, if you go to the stigmatastudios.com, at the bottom of every page, there's links to all my pertinent social media. So reach out and let me know what you think about my preeminent Reuben crisis this week. Don't even get me started with the fucking hot dog truck. Okay. So one of the reoccurring themes that pops up on the show over and over again, starting from the beginning, and then just starting probably with the Atwell episode, but definitely hitting it at the Operation Mockingbird episode, the CIA culture creation episode, of course, the mysterious life, or the dangerous life and mysterious death of William Colby episode, and then recently it's popped up in our computational propaganda episode, and also the data mining, finding friends and influencing people episode. We're kind of really taking a look at media in the past, and with these couple last episodes, in the modern era. And it might seem weird to say the modern era of media, but with the advent, like, I remember what it was like to have the world where Earth did not have a World Wide Web. I grew up, where every reporter wanted to be Deep Throat or Woodward and Bernstein. Every news journalist wanted to be Walter Cronkite. This golden age of totally, as we're going to see, as we've seen in the past, totally just controlled media. And I think it's a totally different dynamic, and that's what we're looking at today. So a lot of parts of this podcast is going to sound like politics, but if you just hang on with me until the end, you're going to understand this whole thing is not about politics. It's about the media, and I just need to put it all into context. So that's why it's going to sound like politics to you guys. But I just need you to hold on, stick with me till the end. And we're going to get into how the media is wrapped up in this specific situation. And we're also going to listen to how some of these movers and shakers actually feel about the media. So the title of this episode right now is called The Media, Retailers of Agenda and the Exploitation and Tyranny of Ignorance. But I might change that. I might change one word in this title. I'm not sure. You'll know before right now because you'll read it on the show notes. But it might be called The Media, Retailers of Agenda and the Exploitation and Tyranny of Sycophants. I'm not sure. So, just like the last two episodes on the list that I just read, which were the computational propaganda, which was all about how Facebook, how social media alters your moods, alters your mind, really. What we talked about is how social media actually alters your mind. And then the data mining episode, when we broke down and talked about this whole thing. So both of these episodes were actually driven by current events, and this is actually driven by also a current event. This is driven by what is going on with the media right now, when it was announced that we were pulling out of the Iran deal. We're stumbling across another teaching moment framed and illuminated by a current event here on the Abercast. So before I go any farther, I am going to try to stay on point and not veer too far into politics. I want to stick to the matter at hand. However, like I said, there is a lot of context that needs to be put on the events that lead up to this Iran deal. So it might sound like politics to you. I'm being open with you guys. I'm a full disclosure kind of cat. So if you stick with me, even through these ugly parts, and we can come out the end, we can come out the other side with a little bit more understanding about the media and how today's political climate, you don't necessarily need the CIA pressuring to run or squash a story. And you don't need payoffs and dark alley deals, you know, as we've seen so many times in the past. All we need is, and like I said, if you stick with me till the end, all we need is inexperienced, sycophantic, ignorant journalists. And I know that sounds rough. And I know a lot of people that are like, wait, I listened to Stephen Colbert and he said that this was bad. Like, Stephen Colbert is an idiot. Like, I'm not gonna get into the functions of government. Like, I'm not gonna explain to you the 2/3 vote that needs to approve a treaty before the president president ratifies a treaty. You know, I'm not going to explain the function of the government. Like I said, this is not the Civics 101 podcast. But what I am going to talk about is, like I said, the events leading up to the Iran deal and what the media's role in all of this was. So we have a lot to do, and we should get on with it. I will post links to all of the articles that we're talking about in the show notes. I'm actually going to post more than the ones we're just talking about. I'm going to post a lot of articles in the show notes. And when you get to the end of this podcast and you're like, fuck this guy, what does he fucking know? I want you to go and read. And I found these articles that I found they're not from alt-right, .com. They're not from InfoWars. They're from fucking like CNN. They're from the Politico. So, I'm not, whatever the politics of the Politico are, I think we all know what the politics of CNN are, but look at the articles. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying Google search it and look it up. I'm not saying this is what Alex Jones says. I'm talking about some real world shit that the liberal media talked about and they're all from back in the day. Most of them. I might have one current article, but they're all from back in the day. So it's not being spun because of what's going on right now. This is the spin that we were dealing with before during the previous administration. Anyhow, oh, fuck, where am I at? I need to just start this whole one over again. We have a lot to do, so let's get on with it. I'll post all the links in the show notes, and of course, we're talking about pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Not really, we're talking about the media and how we got into Obama's signature foreign policy initiative in the first place. We were also looking at the events of how the Iran nuclear deal got put into place, and by extension, why we are getting out of it. Like I said, it's going to sound a lot like politics. Just trust me. The preamble, like the little cold open bit, I just wanted to say, I wanted to read that, and that was actually from 2014. So I just wanted to set up the headspace of the administration. Remember, Obama squandered his first 2 years. He basically did nothing. And during those midterms, the Democrats lost control of the House. And this is when Obama started to try to get to work. For whatever reason, I have no idea why he was idle for 2 years, but he clearly was. But it wasn't going well for him. And I also want to point out, it's my point of view anyway, whenever you hear the term gridlock, it isn't bad. That means the system is working. It means that's how we can tell that our system, our series of checks and balances are working when the government stops. It's this like MacGuffin. It's this fake fucking thing where you're like, no, the government must keep churning on. It must create more laws. It must spew out more regulation. No, it doesn't. It doesn't need to do any of that. And when it's locked up, it's just fine. It's just fine. The system's working great. So think about that whenever you hear the term gridlock. So my point of view here, and the point of view we're going to get into, especially when you take that cold open into consideration, as when you hear the embattled Congress or whatever, like we're going to get into a couple instances where Obama could not get legislation passed, and because of gridlock, and because he couldn't rally even his own side into getting some of this stuff done. He turned to his phone and his pen and did it all by action. So, like I said, going forward, getting into this, specifically the Iran deal, if he did go through the legislative process, if he could get Chuck Schumer to vote to approve this thing. Okay, so what happens is, this treaty or whatever, it's not really a treaty, but this plan gets put into place, and then it gets sent to Congress, and then Congress, a lot of people think that Congress ratifies the plan, making it a treaty. But that's not what happens. It's the president or whoever gets this plan together, sends it to the Congress approves it. There's a term for it. I can't remember what the term is, but they approve it. They're like, yes, this is good, move forward. And then the president ratifies this. If Obama could have got his side to do this and actually made it into a law, Trump would not be able just to do another executive order and pull out of it. So that's one of the main gists of the first part of this episode. So when you hear gridlock, that means the system's working. It's how the checks and balances. And we're going to see now how this pen and phone did not work so well. And we're going to kick this off before we get started, everybody. Just want to make sure that that you got your Jin Jihad ready to go. You got your jar full of clear liquid weapon of mass distraction. I got mine. I'm ready to go. All right. The Iran deal. A treaty or not a treaty? That is the question. Stephen Collinson, CNN, March 2015. Washington, CNN. If it looks like a treaty and walks like a treaty and talks like a treaty, is it a treaty? According to the White House, only if the President of the United States says it is. That's misinformation. It's infuriating Republicans and even some Democrats who are demanding that Obama administration submit any final nuclear deal with Iran to Congress for approval. It goes on to say it represents the party's newest clash with President Barack Hussein Obama over the limits of executive authority. As Republicans object to the pact, they warn it could eventually give Tehran a nuclear bomb. It's not that skepticism that has largely led the White House to define the deal as a non-binding agreement rather than a treaty. Remember, this is 2015. Let me reread that again because it might have taken you off balance. It's that skepticism that has largely led the White House to define the deal as a, quote, non-binding agreement, unquote, rather than a, quote, treaty, unquote. Which the Constitution requires the Senate to, quote, advise and consent, unquote. That's what it's called. So they submit the plan, the Senate looks over it, and they vote. And basically, if it votes yes, it's we advise and consent on it. And then the president ratifies it, and it then becomes a treaty. Going on, Secretary of State John Kerry, reptilian John Kerry, stressed Wednesday that the administration never intended to negotiate a treaty. Let me say that again. This is 2015. Secretary of State John Kerry stressed Wednesday that the administration never intended to negotiate a treaty. Quote, "We've been clear from the beginning. We are not negotiating a legally binding plan. We're negotiating a plan that will have in it a capacity for enforcement, unquote. He said at a Senate hearing. Skipping ahead a little bit, it is a very interesting question, says Nicholas Burns, a former U.S. diplomat, arguing that it is essentially up to the administration to decide whether it's negotiating an agreement that formally binds the United States to commitments under international law, i.e. a treaty or a less stringent agreement. This guy's a fucking diplomat. All right, skipping ahead. David Rivkin, a constitutional and international law expert who worked for President George H.W. Bush, that's the no new taxes Bush, not the mission accomplished Bush, said that any international agreement requiring major undertakings on the part of the United States, such as proposed Iran deal, must be sent to the Senate for advise and consent. The Constitution is quite clear, he said. And it is. Republicans point to none less than the Vice President of the United States to bolster their case. When Vice President Joe plugs Biden, Joe the hands Biden. Hey, by the way, when is Me Too going to catch up to Joe Biden? Because this guy is a creepy motherfucker. Look on YouTube for about Joe Biden being inappropriate with young ladies at the White House. There's hours of it. It's crazy. He was a senator in 2002. He wrote a letter to then Secretary of State Colin Powell charging that the planned strategic arm reduction deal with Russia constituted a treaty subject to the Senate approval since it would require, quote, significant obligations by the United States. This dude was right. The Constitution is very clear. In order to ratify the treaty, the Foreign Relations Committee sends the treaty to the full Senate, and it takes 67 votes to approve. That is a 2/3 vote. Okay, like I said, this is not about politics. Just listen, just hang tight with me, everybody. Everybody that's like, Oh, okay, so we're going to jump to the Washington Times, September 15th of 2015, by David Boyer, a deal that erases the president's red lines. From allowing Iran to keep enriching uranium to abandoning, quote, anytime, anywhere, anytime, unquote, inspections of Tehran's nuclear facilities, the Obama administration has crossed many of its own red lines in a nuclear deal that will lift through economic sanctions of America's longtime adversary. So you guys might remember this. Obama was quite infamous at the time for doing these red lines when he was trying desperately to understand and do something productive. I'm giving him reasonable doubt. On the Syrian problem, he got out there and he was like, that's a red line. If they cross that, there's going to be some repercussions. That's the red line. And then Assad would do exactly what he said. And he goes, okay, well, the new red line is over here. Like, you can't fucking do anything over here. In December these folks, in Tehran, they can't. In December 2013, Secretary of State John F. Kerry said one of the requirements of a good deal with Iran would be to help Iran dismantle its nuclear program. He said it was the, quote, whole point of the sanctions. But the actual deal? No, it doesn't require Iran to dismantle its nuclear program. Iran gets to keep some of its uranium enriching centrifuges and other aspects of its infrastructure. In November 2013, Mr. Kerry said Iran has no right to enrich uranium. The actual deal? Iran gets to continue enriching uranium throughout. Although it must get rid of 2/3 of its centrifuges, it can't enrich the material to weapons grade. President Obama said he wanted inspections anywhere, anytime of Iran's nuclear facilities to ensure Tehran is adhering to their terms of the deal. But the actual agreement? Nope. Iran gets 24 days notice of inspections and suspicious sites. A secret side deal allows Tehran's own inspectors to check military sites where work on the nuclear weapons was thought to have been carried out. To be conservative, I would say at least a dozen red lines have been crossed, said Michael Rubin, a security specialist at the American Enterprises Institute. John Kerry is about as credible as Baghdad Bob, and presumably no more interested in the predominance of American security. The president and his advisors defend the deal as the best possible and say it will prevent Iran from building nuclear weapons. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said Monday the agreement, quote, will be a significant constraint on Iran's nuclear program, unquote. 24 days notice? Does that sound like a significant constraint? Do you know how much shit you can move in 24 days? I moved all the shit out of my shed today and almost dismantled it. Just me in my fucking shed. That was just like one afternoon. This is the reducing of a uranium stockpile by 98%, unplugging thousands of centrifuges, unplugging. This is so stupid because you can just plug it back in. Essentially gutting the core of their plutonium heavy water reactor and agreeing with the IAEA request for information and access that required to complete their report about the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program, Mr. Earnest said. Skipping ahead a little bit, same article. From refusing to let the United States see the secret side agreements to failing to explain if the IAEA will be allowed to inspect the Perchin military site, Iran is already acting as a bully. Oh, you know how we feel about bullies. Well, I'm a millennial, damn it, and I don't like bullies. Dodging questions and telling lies to hide its bad behavior, Mr. Pompeo said. This is the same Pompeo that's in the news this very day. Every member of Congress must at least demand that the administration provide us with an entire agreement before we have to vote on its critically important matter of national security. Words versus deal. Remember Obama hilariously saying, words mean something. Critics in Congress and elsewhere point to the administration's own words to outline how the deal falls short of what the U.S. hoped to achieve. Foreign policy initiative. I'm just going to skip ahead. Mr. Obama continued to lobby lawmakers ahead of next month's vote in Congress on a resolution disapproving the Iran deal. Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan became the latest in a string of Democrats on Monday to back the agreement, bringing the 28 number of the number of senators supporting it. The imminent threat of Iran having nuclear weapons outweighs any flaws I see in the international agreement, Mrs. Stabenow said. For this reason, I must support the agreement. Mr. Obama must have at least 34 backers in the Senate to sustain his veto of the resolution. Two Democratic senators, now listen to this shit. We talked about Chuck Schumer in the Waco episode, and Chuck Schumer and I probably can't agree on the color of the fucking sky, but here we go. Two Democratic senators, Chuck E. Schumer of New York and Robert Menendez of New Jersey, have announced that they will oppose the deal. Moving on, some critics of the deal said the Iranians realized that the president could concede on the nuclear agreement because he backed away from his, quote, red line, quote, 3 years ago on Syria's use of chemical weapons. Senator Tom Cotton, Arkansas Republican, said that Mr. Obama flinched in his showdown with the Syrian dictator Bashar Assad. Anyone with eyes, he said, could conclude that the president doesn't stick by his red lines. They also know that since he was term limited, he had hard and fast negotiating deadline, which they didn't really have. I think that they used the political deadline against him. Mr. Obama said repeatedly, quote, listen to this. I'm just going to stop, collect myself real quick. Mr. Obama has said repeatedly that, quote, no deal is better than a bad deal, unquote. In the eyes of his critics, it's just one more red line that he crossed. What do you guys think? Do you think that no deal is better than a bad deal? Jesus, this fucking guy. Not to beat a dead horse, but the next article shows what is up with not just Schumer's opinion, but every fucking buddy's opinion. Administration maneuvers on Iran deal undercut congressional authority. This is Joshua S. Block, Washington Times, again, September 15th. You can tell this was a big day in this story. September 15th, 2015. During the high-stakes negotiation with the Islamic Republic of Iran, U.S. negotiators made a monumental miscalculation, reneging on critical red lines that were once considered non-negotiable. Its latest maneuver to filibuster congressional votes of approval or disapproval on the deal illustrate that the depths to which the administration has sunk in order to ram through this grave foreign policy and national security error. It actually makes sense why the White House would go to such extremes in order to stifle debate on the Iran deal. The president's shiny new victory is already permanently tarnished by the American people's overwhelming disapproval of the deal. Polls indicate that Americans by a 2-to-1 ratio are opposed to it, with only 21% of Americans in favor. The other studies have clearly shown that the more the people know about the agreement, the less they like it. Meanwhile, among American people's elected officials in Congress, a bipartisan majority in both the Senate and the House of Representatives are firmly opposed. He couldn't seal the deal in the legislature, but did a little bit better in the arena of public opinion. Done by executive action, pen and his phone, was never ratified by Congress. And on January 16th, 2016, the JCPOA was implemented, and we celebrated by forking over $1.7 billion to Tehran in cash on pallets, which is illegal, I think. You try sending some money to Iran, the sanctions will swat it. It'll be like trying to get a volleyball past that American beach volleyball, that female American beach volleyball team. That's what I'm saying. All right, we're going to get into the meat of this, the whole point. If you've lasted up to this long, you're about to get the payoff. About to get the payoff right now. All right. The Selling of the Iran Deal by Mark Hemingway, Weekly Standard, May 13th, 2016. On May 5th, the New York Times posted an online lengthy and candid interview with Ben Rhodes, the 38-year-old Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. The interview was something of a get. The profile by veteran journalist Dave Samuels, which would be published in the May 8th edition of the New York Times Magazine, accurately described Rhodes as the, quote, boy wonder of the Obama White House, unquote. Samuels noted that nearly everyone I spoke to about Rhodes used the phrase mind meld to describe his relationship with President Barack Hussein Obama. The long, beat-sweating profile of senior White House officials have become a genre unto themselves in the prestige press. But Samuels delivered something better than that. As a result, DC media establishment and its insular world of foreign policy wonks were driven into a frenzy of loathing from which they have not yet to recover. In his own words, and presumably his statements reflect the president, he has a mind meld with, Rhodes and other White House officials brag about manipulating the media. They credit themselves with creating a foreign policy narrative divorced from reality to push through the Iranian nuclear deal. The revelation, coupled with the increased widespread recognition that the Obama administration lied about the key lied about key details of the Iran deal, has understandably caused an uproar. Quote, "We created an echo chamber," Rhodes admitted. When I asked him to explain the onslaught of freshly minted experts cheerleading for the deal, quote, "they were saying things that validated what we had given them to say," unquote. Rhodes boasted to Samuels that reporters were easy to manipulate, thanks to the elimination of veteran correspondents and foreign news bureaus. Quote, "Most of the outlets are reporting on world events from Washington. The average reporter we talk to is 27 years old. Their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. That's a sea change. They literally know nothing," unquote. Rhodes' assistant Ned Price then explained how they would specifically manipulate the coverage. "Well, the easiest way for the White House to shape the news," he explained, "is from the briefing podiums, each of which has their own dedicated press corps. Quote, but then there are sort of these force multipliers," unquote, he said, adding, quote, "we have our compadres. I will reach out to a couple of people, and, I wouldn't want to name them," unquote. Then Samuels pipes up and says, "I can name them." He's ticking off a few of the prominent Washington reporters and columnists who often tweet in sync with the White House messaging. And Price laughed. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Finally, Samuels gets White House officials to name names in the press, and, quote, "people construct their own sense of source and credibility now," said Tanya Sotomayor, who worked under Rhodes. Quote, "they elect who they're going to believe," unquote. For those in need of more traditional seeming forms of validation, handpicked Beltway insiders like Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic and Laura Rosen of El Monitor helped retail the administration's narratives. Quote, "Laura Rosen was my RSS feed," unquote. RSS means, it stands for Real Simple Syndication. If you have a podcast and you're listening to it on iTunes or Stitcher, it's being delivered there by the host RSS feed. So basically what he's saying is, she just retweeted everything that I tweeted. She was my Real Simple syndicator. She would just find everything and retweet it. It would be hard to overstate how little reason the media had to trust the Obama administration on Iran. Initially, officials lied about even the existence of bilateral talks with Iran. The official narrative was that the negotiations were keyed to the election of the, quote, moderate president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, in 2013. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki would later confirm reporting that talks with Iran actually began in 2011. As for why journalists would carry so much water for the Obama administration, the simple answer is that they shared the administration's passion for the deal with Iran. Rosen's slavish devotion to Obama's Iran policy, for one, has been something to behold. Last summer, Associated Press broke the news that Obama administration let Iran make the deal with the International Atomic Energy Agency to, quote, self-inspect its own Parchin nuclear sites. The terms of the side deal with Iran were never disclosed to Congress as required by the Corker-Cardin law that assented to the deal. In a Daily Beast column that now looks incredibly prescient, Naval War College professor Tom Nichols noted that the political and media response to the AP's revelation looked very coordinated and oddly lacking in substance. Nichols compared it to the 9/11 truthers who say they are, quote, just asking questions, unquote. as a way to sow doubt. And perhaps the most spurious such question was Rosen's baseless wondering if the documents obtained by the AP were Israeli forgeries. That's just the beginning, when the Iran Revolutionary Guard leader Qassem Soleimani, responsible for killing American soldiers in Iraq, began violating sanctions against Iran by visiting Moscow. Rosen asserted that his travels were lawful. In January, when Iran boarded an American vessel in the Persian Gulf, she responded to the photos of Americans being held captive by tweeting, "Looks like they're making friends," unquote. This is laughable. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I remember it. They were terrified. They made the female sailors cover their heads. In Samuel's piece, Rhodes is quoted lamenting the fact that the leaked news of American sailors being taken captive, Rose was trying to keep it a secret, would overshadow Obama's State of the Union address later the same day. When the controversy over Rhodes' profile launched a slew of criticisms directed at her, one of Rosen's notable supporters tweeted, quote, "Laura Rosen has been the best and most informative feed on the hashtag Iran Talks. You rock, Laura. Keep going," unquote. You rock, Laura. Here, I'm going to do this again as a millennial. Laura Rosen has been the best and most informative feed on Iran Talks. You rock, Laura. Keep going. The words of encouragement came from Abbas Aslani, a foreign policy reporter at Tasnim News Agency, an organization affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Maybe I picked the wrong accent, the wrong effect to read that. Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic is in many ways a very different journalist from Rosen. Rather than the loudest person shouting in the echo chamber, he's much less ideological. He was always quick to emphasize reservations about the Iran deal. What's notable about Goldberg is his entrance is pretty notable. His winning streak is also pretty notable. His spear is frankly a weak finisher move, but it seemed effective in the late 90s. Back to the article. What's notable about Goldberg is his incredible access to the White House, including multiple interviews with the president. Goldberg last profiled Obama in April edition of The Atlantic, and the interview caused quite a stir because Obama openly insulted American allies. I don't know why that causes a stir. He did that shit all the time. Goldberg responded directly to Samuel's article and had one legitimate beef. If the reputation of Goldberg and other journalists would be impunged, perhaps they should have been given a chance to respond. However, Goldberg undercut his demand for fairness by claiming Samuels and his wife, Alana Newhouse, the editor of Tablet magazine, have personal animus, which he had discerned based on gossip from, quote, people who are friends of mine, unquote. The usual laughable Goldberg doesn't give any serious consideration to the apparent reality that the White House officials believed they were spinning him. This is a common thing with social justice warriors, where they're like, "Oh, you're gonna call me on the thing," and then they just attack it, and they're like, "Well, it's obvious that they have a personal animus, to me," and there's no evidence of any of that, and he's flying this flag in the face of legitimate evidence that this guy wrote and published himself in the fucking magazine, in the Atlantic magazine. It's worth noting that the policy infrastructure supporting Rhodes' echo chamber was amply funded. As reported by Bloomberg last year, the Rockefeller family gave millions to liberal and pro-Iranian groups advocating a deal with Iran. And this Wall Street Journal further reported that the White House and Ben Rhodes specifically was helping direct the efforts of these groups to pressure Congress on the Iran deal. They were apparently financial consequences for groups that, as details of the deal started trickling out, weren't completely on board. Much of the pro-deal money was distributed via anti-nuke foundation called plowshare funds. I guess that's from, like, when there's peace in the world, I'll turn my swords into plowshares, I guess. I don't know what this fucking thing is. Who names these fucking things? Plowshares have been given money to the anti-proliferation group called the Institute for Science and International Security, aka the good ISIS. ISIS stopped getting money a few years back, and its president, David Albright, has so far declined to say it was because of the organization wouldn't support Obama's Iran deal. Of course, that's why. But 2 days after the Samuels article was published, the organization tweeted, "We tried to warn Rosen ACA, Arms Control Association, P shares that officials overselling nuclear deal to them should be more critical. The terrifying reality of a nuclear Iran notwithstanding, what may be the most troubling about this episode is how the manipulation of the press has become the new political playbook, and how willing the pawns are to be manipulated." In 2014, Rhodes sold a band of liberal interest groups on the Iran deal, calling it, quote, "the biggest thing President Obama will ever do in his second term on foreign policy. This is health care for us, just to put it in context," unquote. It's an apt comparison because the selling of Obamacare perfectly tracks the dishonest machinations of the Iran deal. First, tell a bunch of brazen lies designed to soften your political resistance. Obamacare will be deficit neutral. Pah! And, quote, "if you like your health insurance, you can keep it." Second, get a bunch of court stenographers to be, quote, force multipliers in the press. Ezra Klein, then at the Washington Post, and the New Republic's Jonathan Cohen were relentlessly on message, as were hundreds of other reporters on the, quote, journo list, unquote, email list that Klein maintained. Also enlisted were media-savvy wonks, such as MIT economist Jonathan Gruber, who later admitted to being deceptive about the aspects of the law to sell it, along with the deep-pocketed liberal foundations. Third, when reality catches up with the narrative, Obamacare is going to cost trillions and millions are losing their health care. Remember, if you like your doctor, you can keep it. If you folks out there like your doctor, you can keep it. Well, on the same echo chamber that lied in the first place to gaslight the critics, have them alternately insist everyone knew that this was going to happen, and this is just a small price to pay for being on the right side of history. And finally, have your fellow travelers bask in achieving your political objective, even though a trail of self-serving lies left behind seriously erodes the public trust necessary to govern the future. So there's a great article written on tabletmag.com called "The Iran Deal is Now Officially a Disaster, So Where Are You?" by Lee Smith. I'll have a link to that in the show notes if you want to get a good postscript to all of this. So there is the story of the White House using the media to create an echo chamber to push people's Overton windows around, unleashing a never-ending loud attack dog. How can you look around at the media on TV nowadays and take any of it seriously? The more you look at, the more you can see the strings. At least I can. And the crazy thing is that they didn't get a payoff. They didn't do it in the name of patriotism or anything like that. They just did it out of a supine, spineless, navel-gazing allegiance to this guy who's just lying to them and disrespecting them. There's a thing I had an article from in here but I took it out for time. I mean, I'm already running super late, but it talks about Ben Rhodes, and he talks about Hillary Clinton, and he calls her the glob. It's fucking really funny. Anyhow, this is why pulling out of the Iran deal is important. It doesn't seem to be like they're just trying to ruin Obama's embarrassing foreign policy legacy. It's a major correction of our system. This goes back to that checks and balances thing. You know, when our immediate checks and balances failed, and quite frankly, our legal system also failed, and our legislator failed as well, this is just trying to put everything right again and make everything not so fucking dangerous to the world. So we're going to go ahead and end the show, but if you stick around until after, we're going to take a look at some of the unintended consequences and other unethical, illegal, and quite frankly shady stuff that happened as a result of this deal. And then the next episode, probably the next episode or two, is also going to be about a scandal that arose and was able to happen about this deal. I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm still trying to get it together, but it's going to be at least one gigantic episode. I'm betting that it's going to be 2, maybe even 3 episodes, but it has to do specifically with this, and it has to do with Iran. It has to do with the Iran deal. So hang on tight. Or hang on loosely, whatever. I'd like to encourage everyone to go and rate and review the show on iTunes. Check out stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com. You can find my social media links in there, and let me know. Weigh in on this Reuben situation. I'm still tangled up about that. Please consider supporting the Patreon. It's patreon.com/abercast, I think is what it is. I mean, you can just go to the website and find it there. I'm really trying to get this Books for Soldiers program off the ground, and I need your help. And I also want to send you a great mug and some bookmarks and shit, maybe a t-shirt down the line. So do all that stuff. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it and love everybody, and we'll see you next week. Like I said, hey, if you want to get to the end of all this and hear about some of the crazy shit that happened as a result of this deal, I'm going to get into that at the end of all this. So hang in if you want. If not, see you next week. Peace out.
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm come face-to-face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
All right, now this is just me and you. Let's get into some of the other stuff here. We're going to go back to September 2016. This was on the AP. $1.7 billion payment to Iran was all in cash due to effectiveness of sanctions, the White House says. The Obama administration is acknowledging the transfer of $1.7 billion to Iran earlier this year was made entirely of cash, using non-U.S. currency. As Republican critics of this transaction continue to denounce the payments. A Treasury Department spokeswoman, Dawn Selleck, I don't know if she's related to Tom or not, said in a statement late Tuesday that the cash payments were necessary because of, quote, effectiveness of U.S. and international sanctions, unquote, which isolated Iran from the international finance system. The $1.7 billion was a settlement of a decades-old arbitration claim between the U.S. and Iran. Initially, 40 million of euros, Swiss francs, and other foreign currency was delivered on pallets. January 17th, the same day, Tehran agreed to release 4 American prisoners. So I'm going to skip the rest of this article. I think that's pretty much all we need to know, is that they bought 4 American prisoners with $1.7 billion of folding money, which I'm sure is illegal. I guess they got around it by it not being non-U.S. denominations. So we're going to skip ahead to this next bit here, and then we'll wrap this up. Reptilian John Kerry: some sanction relief money for Iran will go to terrorism. Elise Labat wrote this article in January 21 of 2016. This was on CNN, Davos, Switzerland, CNN. Secretary of State and Reptilian John Kerry acknowledged to CNBC Thursday that some of the money Iran received in sanction relief would go to groups considered terrorist. When asked about whether some of the $150 billion in sanctions relief to Iran would go to terrorist groups, Kerry reiterated that after settling debts, Iran would receive close to $55 billion and conceded that some of that could go to groups considered terrorists, saying there was nothing the U.S. could do to prevent it. Like, we could just not give it to them. Like, that sounds pretty good to me. I think some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or other entities, some of which are labeled terrorists, he said in an interview in Davos, referring to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. You know, to some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented. Like, if we just didn't give it to them, it could be prevented. Read: Obama and Kerry legacies hang in the balance on Iran. But he added that right now, we are not seeing the early delivery of funds going to that kind of endeavor at this point in time. Earlier Thursday, speaking to reporters before a meeting with Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, Kerry defended the U.S. use of sanctions against Iran following charges by Iran Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif in his interview with CNN's Christina Amanpour that the recent sanctions were illegal and that some of the U.S. were addicted to these sanctions. We have made it very clear that we use the sanctions when we think that they are appropriate in order to counter behavior that we believe has broken the law and has challenged the United Nations Security Council or threatened the United States. You know, Kerry told reporters, "We think that there may have been used judiciously and effectively, or we're looking to move on now to put the test of the willingness of Iran and other countries in the region to try to reduce tensions and to move into a different direction." He also said that there was such great demand on the Iranian government to develop the country that there is no way we could succeed in what they want to do if we are busy funding a lot of terrorism. So, do you know what Iran was like in the 70s? In the 70s, Iran was a hub. It was an oasis of freedom. Like, women could drive. They didn't have to dress up like the ghost from the Charlie Brown cartoon. You know, it was not oppressive. They called it the Little West, or like the Little America, like their freedom. And then Jimmy Carter fucked everything up in the 70s. I mean, maybe I should do a whole episode on how Jimmy Carter fucked the whole world. His fucking peanut farming, fucking submarining dolt. Anyhow, this whole thing is ridiculous. I'm not going to finish reading this article. I think that you guys get the picture. But, put that over there. Put this over here. Rewind this. Do this. Rattle the glass. All right. So, I have been John Towers. This has been the Abercast. Thank you guys for hanging in towards the end. Remember, next episodes are going to be all Iran, and there's going to be some crazy shit that you guys probably have not heard about in there. I'm excited. I'm raring to go. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to tell you guys about it and hear what you think. So, feel free to find me, message me in any of these ways that you can. And I'm going to close the episode out again with my boys Soda Jerk, and this is a song called Fucking Fight. Yeah!
Well, I was just 14 when I had my first sip in my darling whiskey, and tightened up her grip. And she made me sick that night. I knew that the whiskey would take up my life. Well, I stand a full 2 inches with a 5'9", and every guy here wants to take me alive. So I took a shot of whiskey and punch out the lights. The whiskey, it makes me wanna fucking fight. I fucking fight, fucking fight. The whiskey, it makes me wanna fucking fight. Well, every woman here up in this place, not even the crack of dawn is safe. So I'll take a shot of whiskey and say goodnight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. I fucking fight, fucking fight. The whiskey, it makes me wanna fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight.
Right.